You've heard the stories, right? The Gilded Age. You picture these titans of industry, the robber barons, building these enormous empires by just crushing everyone in their path. It's the classic tale of capitalism running wild. But what if that story isn't the whole story?
That's really the question we're digging into today. Were these huge trusts, the Standard Oils and the U.S. Steels of the world, were they really as powerful and permanent as we've been led to believe? Or was something else going on under the surface?
I mean, the popular image is one of just total domination. You hear names like Rockefeller or J.P. Morgan, and your brain immediately jumps to the word monopoly. The whole idea is that they built these things by ruthlessly stamping out any and all competition.
Okay, so that's the common belief we're going to put under the microscope. Because, and this is the interesting part, when you actually look at the economic data from back then, a very, very different picture starts to emerge. One that looks a lot more like fierce and open competition.
So let's start with the big one, the poster child for monopoly itself, John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil. I mean, if any company was an unkillable monopoly, it had to be this one, right? Well, maybe not.
And wow, look at that. At their absolute peak, we're talking 1879. Standard Oil had a mind-blowing 90% of the American oil refining market. 90%! On paper, that looks like game over. Total unbeatable control. How in the world could anyone even begin to compete with that? Okay, but here's where the story we all know starts to get a little shaky. The legend says Rockefeller would slash prices to bankrupt all his rivals. But the historical records? They show something else. His #1 method wasn't to crush competitors, it was to buy them out. And get this, he wasn't lowballing them, he was often paying really handsome premium prices for their refineries.
But this strategy created this bizarre and totally unintended problem. Think about it. If you're famous for paying top dollar for refineries, what does that encourage people to do? It encourages them to build new refineries. Some entrepreneurs were literally building them for the sole purpose of being bought out by him. He was basically on this treadmill, constantly paying out what he himself called blackmail just to keep buying up a never-ending stream of new competitors. It just couldn't last.
And this chart just lays it all out. Look at those numbers. Way before the famous antitrust case broke up the company in 1911, its market share was already in decline. By 1921, the combined share of all the little baby Standard companies was down to just 50%. The market, it seems, was already doing the job that the government would later take all the credit for. And here's the thing. Standard Oil wasn't just some fluke. We see this pattern again and again. So let's look at our next case, U.S. Steel. This was the behemoth created by the legendary J.P. Morgan. We're talking about the world's first billion-dollar corporation, a merger of giants designed to completely dominate the steel industry. When it was born in 1901, U.S. Steel controlled 62% of the market. Now, don't get me wrong, that is a huge slice of the pie. But notice, it's not the 90% Standard Oil had. It had significant competition right from day one. And for this giant corporation, things went downhill fast.
And this just proves that bigger isn't always better. For investors, U.S. Steel was a disaster right out of the gate. The stock price absolutely plummeted from $55 a share down to just $9 in its first 3 years. So the crucial point is, even though it was massive, it was not a very successful or profitable company.
This part is just fascinating. The company's chairman, Judge Elbert Gary, he tried to get around this whole competition problem by hosting these fancy dinners where all the steel leaders would make these so-called gentlemen's agreements to keep prices high. But it never worked for long. Some smaller, nimbler firm would always break the agreement and secretly cut their prices to steal away business. The cartel simply could not hold together.
Okay, so we've seen it in oil, and we've seen it in steel. And this wasn't just a couple of isolated examples. It was a consistent pattern that played out across multiple industries. The whole dream of creating a stable, profitable monopoly was turning out to be just that, a dream.
And this table really drives the point home. Look at International Harvester, down from 85% to 64%. And the Sugar Trust, even more dramatic. It completely collapsed from 95% of the market all the way down to 28% in 25 years. In pretty much every case, their market dominance just steadily eroded over time.
But maybe the most stunning admission of all came from the National Biscuit Company, who you probably know today as Nabisco. In their own 1901 annual report, they basically confessed that trying to control competition by either fighting it or buying it was a complete failure. that would only lead to disaster. Their conclusion? They had to focus on just, making a better cracker.
So why did this keep happening? Why couldn't these massive, super well-funded corporations keep their grip on their industries? Well, the answer comes down to some fundamental economic principles that even the most powerful titans just couldn't get around.
It really boils down to three key things. First, when a trust raised prices, those huge profits were like a giant magnet, pulling in new competitors who wanted a piece of the action. Second, these huge companies often got bloated and bureaucratic. They became slow, conservative, and they failed to innovate. And third, the smaller firms were just more agile. They had lower costs and could adapt to new technology way faster. U.S. Steel, for example, was famously late to the party on adopting more efficient ways of making steel.
And this brings us to a really crucial twist in the story. H.O. Havemeyer, the guy who ran the powerful sugar trust, said it himself. He admitted that his trust probably wouldn't even exist without high protective tariffs from the government that shielded it from more efficient foreign competition, which suggests that maybe the real source of monopoly power wasn't the free market at all. And this is the final piece of the puzzle. After failing again and again to get a stable monopoly going in the competitive marketplace, these business leaders discovered a much more effective way to get control.
So they had tried to conquer their industries through private economic means, right? They built these massive corporations, they bought out rivals, they tried to collude on prices, and on a free and open playing field, they consistently failed to hold on to their dominance. So, what did they do next?
And there it is. That's the punchline to this whole story. After failing in the marketplace, these powerful business interests shifted their efforts to the political arena. They started pushing for government regulation to create the cartels and the stability that free market competition simply would not give them. And that leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. This history really challenges the conventional story we're told, and it suggests that free market competition is actually a really powerful and persistent force. It raises a fundamental question about the relationship between business and government, a question that's just as relevant today as it was back then. So what should you take away from all this? Well, that's for you to decide. Thanks for tuning in.